Hi, I'm a Possum and I find garbage. Today's garbage is Doom, a movie based on a video game series which has been blamed for inspiring horrible things, including this movie. Now, I actually already reviewed a Doom movie before, one which came out and went direct to video last year called Doom Annihilation. It had a really small budget and it looked worse than an episode of Stargate SG-1. There's no continuity between them, so you don't have to watch that one to understand this one. But what you do have to watch is your blood pressure. Now, that movie was awful. And so is this one, but this one is slightly less awful than that one. But I ain't talking about that one because I already talked about that one. So now I'm talking about this one. Hello?
I'm on my way. Don't start the review without me.
Who is this?
It's me, the demon.
The demon? The same one who broke my window in my Doom Annihilation review?
Yeah.
What do you want?
I heard you're reviewing another Doom movie.
Oh, so that means you could just invite yourself to be in it?
Well, a review's gotta have a plot, doesn't it?
No, it doesn't. F*** off. The movie starts in space with a voiceover narration and no opening text because this movie's target audience is people who don't know how to read. The narrator tells us scientists in the year 2026 discovered some teleporter thing in the Nevada that led to the ruins of some ancient city on Mars. They called the teleporter thing the Ark. I guess because it sounds biblical even though the reference makes no sense. We then see the Universal logo, but the Earth is replaced by Mars, which I guess is kinda cute. Then we zoom into the Union Aerospace Corporation's Olduvai research facility and see a bunch of scientists running away with a random and pointlessly slowed down shot. They get picked off one by some unseen horrors, and then we see our first named character, Dr. Carmack, who's named after John Carmack, the co-founder of id Software and co-creator of Doom. Dr. Carmack runs into a room and closes the door on some lady's arm. Then tells the computer they've had a level 5 breach and orders the quarantine, but then the door rips open. I had a level 5 breach once, but there's no time to talk about my colostomy bag because after the title sequence we cut to Dwayne Johnson playing some kind of space marine sergeant, creatively named Sarge, getting orders to lead a mission to Olduvai to rescue the scientists and retrieve UAC property. We then see Sarge's squad screwing around while they wait for the transport to take them away on shore leave, or whatever they call it. We're introduced to our side characters who each have exactly one defining characteristic. There's Duke, the goofy one, Goat, the religious one, Destroyer, the tough one, Mac, the Asian one, Kid, the rookie, and Portman, the pervy one.
I'm going down to El Honta. I'm gonna lock myself in a motel room, a bottle of tequila, and 3 she-boys.
Fun fact, El Honto is not a real place. Sarge comes in and tells them the leave is canceled and they have a mission to Mars. I ain't talking about that movie. And then we're introduced to our protagonist, John Grimm, played by Carl Urban. Sarge tells him he's not taking him with them because they gotta go to Olduvai, which is a problem for him. We're not gonna find out why until later. So they all get suited up and pour into the helicopter to go to the Ark. And everyone conveniently gets their nicknames said out loud to them by a robot voice, so we don't have to listen for them in dialogue to learn who any of these people are.
Handle ID, the kid.
But Grimm jumps on at the last second, having decided to go, and we hear his nickname.
Handle ID, Reaper.
You get it? Grimm? Reaper? You know, when I was in prison, they called me Ben Dover. Can you guess why they called me that? It's because I had been to Dover once, and I told them all about it. It's a nice place. Real shame the Schwartz Center for the Arts closed, though. Anyway, they fly to the Ark, and Portman is unnecessarily antagonistic.
A couple days ago, I asked Sarge for a little tea. The next day, he brought you onto the team.
Sarge briefs everyone on their mission, then asks Grimm if he thinks she is still at Olduvai. He says he hasn't seen this mysterious woman in 10 years.
I guess you gotta face your demons sometime.
This is the start of this obnoxious thing this movie will keep doing. Several times throughout the movie, they make references to hell and demons, but even though the game this movie is ostensibly based on is all about shooting demons, there isn't a single demon in this movie. We find out at some point that all the monsters are mutated humans. I don't know if any of these references are just meant to mock the fans who came to see a movie adaptation of a game where you shoot demons, or if they were actually dumb enough to think this would be a clever reference. I also don't know why they decided to not have any demons in this movie. The only possibility that makes sense is maybe they needed to get past censorship in some overseas markets which don't allow depictions of demons or other supernatural creatures. So they arrive at the Ark in Nevada and the elevator comes up. Kid is afraid of it for some reason, so he doesn't get on right away.
Hesitate, people die.
Not necessarily. Sometimes you just miss your chance to tell her how you really feel. And then she gets with another guy, and you sit back and watch as she starts a family without you. And then you lay in bed every night, alone, wondering what could have been. All because you were too cowardly to show your feelings. They take the elevator down and meet some UAC guy who shows them the teleporter thing which they go through. They arrive at Mars, where we're introduced to another UAC guy named Pinky, which is another reference to the games. He has wheels for legs because of a teleporter accident. Sarge tells Mac to stay with Pinky and make sure nobody violates the quarantine. Then they go to the Old Dubai lobby where the surviving scientists are hanging out.
Coffee. Couple million light years from breakfast.
The farthest Mars ever gets from Earth is 250 million miles. That's 0.000043 light years. You're off by a factor of more than 46 million. I expected better scientific accuracy from a Doom movie. Some guy asked Sarge if he could start evacuating everyone, and Sarge says they can't because they're under a level 5 quarantine. We're introduced to Samantha, who turns out to be Grimm's sister. They don't get along for some reason. Basic storytelling logic dictates that the reason they don't get along would be revealed at some point later on, but it's never made clear. We find out later that when Grimm and Samantha were kids, their parents died in some kind of accident at this facility, and this is for some reason caused them to grow apart from each other. Now, I'm not saying that couldn't happen, but it's never elaborated on, and the movie treats this backstory as some kind of inner conflict for Grimm which he has to overcome as part of his character arc. But since it's never explained to the audience how exactly this caused Grimm to become the way he is, there's no real clear progression to be made. I'll come back to this point later. Samantha leads them to the airlock to the laboratories because for some reason the laboratory has an airlock which goes from one interior room to another. That other guy plays them a recording of people screaming. This isn't helpful to the mission at all, it's just a spooky thing for the audience. So they open the door and Sarge tells them to split up into groups of 2. Kinda defeats the purpose of a squad if you're not together, but I guess the movie needs to happen. While that's going on, Pinky remarks on Mac's name. It turns out they only call him Mac because these dumb Americans are too racist and culturally insensitive to learn how to say his wacky anime name.
Katsuhiko Kumanosuke Takahashi.
Whoa, slow down there, Samurai Jack. You trying to wake up Godzilla? This is this character's only trait, by the way. He's just the Asian one, who they call Mac because his real name is wacky and foreign. He barely even says anything, and it makes me wonder if they cast an Asian guy in this role just so they could make that joke. I mean, did this actor know they were going to do that when he took the role? How would you feel if you were asked to be in a movie for no reason other than so they can make a gag about your culture's naming conventions? Sarge and Duke wander around the spooky basement while Portman and Goat go to the lab where they see another organs in jars. I keep my organs in my pants. The room is also full of test animals, but for some reason they all decide to be quiet until just now. The Kid and Destroyer find a bloody lab coat, then Grimm and Samantha make their way to the genetics lab where Samantha starts downloading the UAC's files. While that's happening, Goat and Portman find a room with a big pit in the floor, which Goat explains is some kind of holding cell for prisoners, and it has electric walls. Then Duke and Sarge find the armory, and Sarge sees a computer screen showing the BFG, but when he tries to use the handprint scanner thing to open the door, it won't let him. You'd think that since his mission is to retrieve UAC property, they would give him a key or something since the BFG is, UAC property. But I guess teasing the audience with another game reference that will come into play later is more important. Then Destroyer and the Kid wander around and Kid gets startled by a hose and shoots at it like a well-trained Marine would. Then we cut back to Grimm and Samantha in the genetics lab, where Grimm notices a couple humanoid skeletons, which Samantha explains are actually native Martians, who just happen to look exactly like humans. This is never explained. Grimm realizes Samantha reopened an old dig site, and this upsets him for some reason we'll learn about later. Samantha shows Grimm the Martian's genome, and it turns out their DNA is almost identical to that of humans, except they have a 24th pair of chromosomes. What Samantha says made them super strong and super intelligent, and gave them the super healing abilities. But then she explained that they found older fossils with only 23 chromosomes, meaning the 24th one may be the result of genetic engineering, which is to imply the Martians gave themselves an extra chromosome. Maybe if I had an extra chromosome, I'd be on the intellectual level of this movie. Then Grimm comments on how the adult Monsanto skeleton appears to be shielding the baby skeleton from something as they cower in fear, which is stupid because the only way that could be in that pose is if either the scientists positioned them that way for whatever reason, or if they actually died frozen in that pose and somehow stayed that way until they were found thousands of years later. So if the movie is trying to imply that the mutated monsters, which will be revealed later, mauled them to death, then this movie is also trying to imply that they just held that pose while they were being mauled, and then their bodies stayed that way as they decomposed. Between writing this into the script, having somebody make the prop, and filming the scene, did nobody stop to think how stupid this is? Anyway, Grimm gets a call on the radio from Portman telling him he and Goat saw something. And then we cut to Portman and Goat looking around Dr. Carmack's office when somebody pops out. They shoot at them, but miss. They chase them and it turns out to be Dr. Carmack. I guess it's a good thing their incompetence at shooting prevented them from accidentally killing the guy they were sent in to rescue. So Dr. Carmack is now crazy and holding the severed arm of that woman from earlier. And all the Marines conveniently show up at the same time to watch him rip his own ear off. Sarge tells Duke to bring Dr. Carmack to the infirmary. Then he tells Portman and Kid to watch the airlock. We then see Kid and Portman standing around. Kid asks Portman if he has any drugs, and it turns out he does. And even though Portman has been nothing but antagonistic to Kid this whole time, he gives him a couple pills which look like M&Ms. Then Grimm and Goat enter the stairwell where Goat accidentally kicks a can down the stairs, which causes him to swear. He then pulls out a knife and carves a cross into his arm because he said God's name in vain. Okay, so I guess in the future, the Marines are fine recruiting drug-crazed nymphomaniacs and self-mutilating religious nutjobs. They must be desperate. Maybe their budget got slashed. That would make sense. I mean, they don't even give these guys helmets. So then Portman and Kid find a naked lady in a locker room, but it turns out she's a zombie, so they shoot her. Then it turns out she's the lady who got her arm caught in the door. Not that she's relevant to the plot or anything. Really, she's never even mentioned again. They just wanted some nudity in the movie, so they wrote this character in for some zombie Meanwhile, Duke and Samantha take Dr. Carmack to the infirmary, and Duke has a problem with this thing called a nano wall, which is like a wobbly ghost wall that turns solid to keep people in or out. You know, I could see a science fiction prison having a use for such a thing, but why the infirmary? Why would the room for sick and injured people have a magic wall instead of a simple door? Or better yet, why have something like that anywhere when a simple door does the job just fine? How much electricity does that thing use up? Can you leave if the power goes out? So anyway, Dr. Carmack babbles incoherently and tells them they need to shut it down, but he doesn't say what it is, and nothing ever gets shut down in this movie, so I don't even know why that line was included. While that's going on, Grimm and Goat go back to the room with all the animals, but all the animals are gone now, and they find a zombie eating rats, and they shoot him. He was the only guy in the room, so is the movie implying that he ate all the animals by himself, including the dogs? He must have some fast metabolism for a dead guy. Then Sergeant Destroyer hears something banging around in an air duct, so the Destroyer takes a look, and a monkey comes screeching at him. So Destroyer and Sarge panic and shoot it, again, like well-trained Marines would. Its blood drips from the bullet holes, and Sarge feels the need to let it drip onto his hand so he can look at it and see that it's all chunky. Yeah, just go ahead and touch the blood of an animal that escaped from a genetics lab, where they likely injected it with God knows what. It's not like there's a quarantine going on or anything. At the same time, Samantha and some other doctor lady draw blood from Dr. Carmack and say he also has the chunky black stuff in his blood. Chunky stuff so thick that should have blocked his arteries and killed him. But then Grim and Goat see something big jumping around and they chase it to a sewer. We cut back to the infirmary where Samantha tells the other doctor lady to leave because the movie doesn't need her anymore, and it never really did when you think about it. Then they notice Dr. Carmack is gone. Back in the sewers, the Marines wade knee-deep in human waste until they find a lab coat of somebody named Dr. Steve Willits, who I guess decided to drown himself in sewage after participating in Project Steve. They continue searching until Portman falls into a hole, and then they split up for, what is this, the third time now? Kid goes with Grim and starts babbling. Then Grim notices his pupils are really big, which he takes as an indication that he's on drugs. I mean, he is on drugs, but it could also be because they're in a dark sewer. That's how eyes work. So Goat's light goes out for no reason, and then he gets attacked by some kind of monster who puts a thing on his neck. Grim shoots it, then Sarge yells for everyone to evacuate while the Marines rush Goat to the infirmary in their now inexplicably clean uniforms. They get him into the infirmary, and instead of getting any of the dozens of doctors in this facility to help them, the Marines try to give him first aid themselves, which goes about as well as you'd expect. So Goat's dead, and Sarge shows Samantha the monster Grim shot in the sewer and asks if he knows what it is or where it came from, but she doesn't know. Grim says it's not the thing they chased out of the lab, so they realize there's more than one. Sarge tells Destroyer, Kid, and Portman to go check one of the doors, and then he calls Mac on the radio and tells him to give Pinky a weapon and some grenades so he can guard the Ark. Then Mac just leaves the handicapped guy with no combat training alone to go do something, I guess. We then cut to Samantha examining the dead monster when she accidentally drops her flashlight down its throat. And even though she has no idea what this thing is or what kind of diseases it might be carrying, she tells Duke to hold its mouth open with his bare hands so she can reach down with her arm down its throat to retrieve it. While they do that, Samantha tells Duke about how she and Grim don't get along.
Well, I knew Reaper before all the drop-down give 50 woo-ah stuff.
Yeah? But it's hoo-ah.
Actually, it's neither. Hoo-ah is what they say in the Army and Air Force. These are Marines, so the one you're looking for is oorah, a battle cry with a complex and disputed history which... What do you want now?
I think I'm lost.
Okay, so how's this my problem?
I can't be in your review if I can't get there.
When have I ever even hinted that I wanted you to be in this review?
Well, who else would?
A lot of people. People like Alex Bones, Richard Sticks 99, Charles J. Harris, Ray Ned Gian Guevara, John Wellington, Joseph Reagan, Kills Shot, Liv Exquisite, Michael Lowe, Nicholas Slater, Oliver Zanzer, Pete T, Paco, Reed Strickland, Ricky Baruga, Ruin Scepter, Sears Fox, The Sauce God, Twilight City Studios YouTube channel, and Victor Alexandrovich Gontar.
You let those people in your video? What makes them so special?
They paid for the shout out on Patreon.
Oh yeah? How much?
$10.
$10? You can suck my for $10.
That's the price of notoriety, baby.
Whatever. Look, I'm lost. I just passed a rock that looks like Dwayne Johnson.
Oh, I know where that is. Take the left at the next fork.
Okay.
Prick. Samantha breaks her scalpel and tells Duke to go get her a power bone saw. Why this strong, independent woman can't go get it herself since she knows where it is instead of making the black guy do it, I don't know. But then we cut back to the Marines. Sarge says they're gonna go back in. And when Portman points out that standard procedure to call in reinforcements, Sarge just tells him to go f himself. Back in the infirmary, the lights start flickering like this is some kind of bad horror movie or something. So Samantha decides to go into the hallway alone when she knows there are monsters running around. She finds Duke, but then they get attacked by a monster. Duke shoots it, but I guess this one's bulletproof, unlike the last one. So it chases them, but then they close the nano wall as it's passing through, and it gets stuck and shoots out its tongue thing. Then we see the other Marines looking around at the archaeological dig site, where I guess they found the Martian skeletons. Grim looks out a window and has a flashback to when his parents were killed in some kind of accident, which I guess has something to do with why he and Samantha don't get along. Apparently this is where it happened, and that's why he's so mad at Samantha for reopening the dig site. Okay, so I can appreciate the movie at least trying to give the protagonist some kind of backstory, but it doesn't really have anything to do with the plot. See, normally in a movie or any kind of story, the protagonist will have some kind of personal problem they have to overcome, and that personal problem will have some kind of parallel with the central conflict of the story. When this is done properly, you get thematic cohesion. So what's the theme of this movie? Well, what's the theme of any movie? The theme usually concerns the solution to the protagonist's personal struggle. John Truby defines a theme as a sort of moral argument, the author's vision of how to live a good life. And they could show this directly through having the characters learn to embody it, or they can do it indirectly by having the story serve as a sort of warning. In The Matrix, Neo starts out working a dead-end job in a world in which everything is predetermined by machine overlords and choice is just an illusion. He has to learn to free his mind from the constructed world of the Matrix in order to take control of his destiny. So in The Matrix, the theme is taking control over one's life and making one's own decisions. In Mad Max Fury Road, Max starts off as a drifter who's only concerned with his own survival. He gets enslaved by a tyrant who considers all of his subjects to be his property. Men get used as blood bags and brainwashed into being human weapons, and women get milked and used as breeding stock. Everyone is objectified. Max teams up with Furiosa to escape with some other slaves to a sort of promised land, but when it turns out that land doesn't exist, Max convinces the slaves to go back to overthrow the tyrant and build their own free nation. And in the process, Max finds his humanity. So in Fury Road, the theme is the reclamation of personhood. In There Will Be Blood, Daniel Plainview is a ruthless businessman with no morals, who tricks a small town into letting him buy up all the land so he can get rich off the oil. Through the single-minded pursuit of wealth, he backstabs his way to the top, pushing away everyone who ever offered him a chance at friendship or family. And in the end, after he's bought the big mansion he always wanted so he could isolate himself from the rest of humanity, he becomes a drunken shell of a man who doesn't know what to do with himself now that he has no goal to strive for, and ends up losing his last shred of humanity in a fit of rage. So There Will Be Blood is a warning about the dangers of unchecked greed and ambition. So what's the theme of Doom? Well, let's think about it. John Grimm has to learn to let go of the past. Okay, but we don't know anything about his past other than his parents died. And what does that have to do with the plot? What does Grimm brooding over the death of his parents have to do with fighting monsters in an underground laboratory on Mars?
I guess you gotta face your demons sometime.
You might say Grimm has to fight literal demons in order to face his inner ones, whatever they might be, which would count as a sort of metaphor, albeit a very clumsy one, but there aren't any demons in this movie. They're mutants because some dumb studio executive decided to completely abandon the premise of the games that this movie is based on. And because of that, the metaphor doesn't work. Nobody ever said you have to face your inner mutant. So the main character's backstory is pretty much entirely unknown, despite the fact his entire character hinges on it. And because we don't know what his backstory is, we can't make any parallels to the plot. His whole backstory also doesn't make much sense. Carl Urban was 33 when he starred in this movie, so if we assume his character is the same age, then in order for him to have spent his childhood on Mars, there would have had to have been a human settlement at some point within the past 33 years. This movie takes place in the year 2046, and the movie was made in 2005. Did the filmmakers think we would have a colony on Mars by 2013? So Sarge and Grimm find a couple dead bodies by the door, and Sarge radios Mac, who promptly gets decapitated by a monster. But according to the Doom fandom wiki, he survived this. Don't ask me how. They chase the monster, but then it gets back into the lab, so Sarge gets on the radio and tells Pinky to use a grenade to stop the monster from getting to the Ark if it makes it there, because they can't afford to let it get to Earth. Then he tells everyone to split up again and he goes back to the armory. Sarge finds a severed hand on the floor. Then we cut back to the infirmary where Samantha conducts an autopsy on the monster and sees that it has all the same organs as a human except for an appendix. So she jumps to the conclusion that it had it removed, which would mean it used to be human, instead of making the more natural assumption that this monster is a species which doesn't have an appendix, like a cat or a dog. It also raises the question of why the monster's organs would all be the same if everything else has changed. I mean, the bones in their skull completely reconfigured, but the organs haven't? Okay, so this is the scene where it's revealed that the monsters in this movie are mutated humans, as opposed to demons from hell like in the games. I don't know why they decided to make this change from the source material. Did they think it'd be more believable to have a bogus scientific explanation for the monsters in a Doom movie? Because if you want to talk about science, I can tell you adding an extra chromosome doesn't enhance your abilities. It actually kind of has the opposite effect. But then Goat wakes up as a zombie and bangs his head on the glass, and every time he does it, Samantha screams like an idiot. Because women always gotta scream in movies, right? So Goat bashes his head until he dies again, and Samantha again jumps to the conclusion that he knew he was turning into a monster and decided to kill himself, as opposed to just running into the window because that's exactly the sort of thing a mindless reanimated corpse would do.
This thing didn't butcher Willits. It is Willits.
We then cut back to Portman telling Destroyer that he needs to take a dump. Then we cut to Sarge using the hand he found to open the door to the BFG. I guess because the hand he found just happened to belong to somebody who had clearance. That's convenient. I mean, it's not like any random scientist in this facility could just walk up and open the door. Otherwise, what would be the point of having the hand scanner? So Sarge gawks at the BFG the same way Movie Bob gawks at a chicken marinated in Mountain Dew. Then he grabs it. Then we cut back to Portman walking down to the bathroom. He locks himself in a stall. Then Pinky goes on the radio, tells him he can't see anything on his gun cam. To which Portman insults him for no reason. Then we see Destroyer finding his way to the holding cell from earlier, when suddenly he gets attacked by a big monster who throws him into the pit. Back in the bathroom, Portman tries to use his radio to secretly order reinforcements. Then Destroyer tries to fight the big monster by using a CRT monitor as a flail. I guess because they still use CRT monitors in this spacefaring future. When that doesn't work, Destroyer hits the monster with a pipe, which then inexplicably changes length between shots, enabling him to use it to pin the monster against the wall. But then the monster gets loose and kills Destroyer by pulling down the chain he's climbing. So I guess even though he fell into the pit before and was just fine afterwards, a fall from the same height kills him this time. This movie's about as consistent as Joe Biden. We cut back to the bathroom again, and Portman hears something moving around. So he grabs his gun and realizes his magazine is empty. I guess because he never thought to check it until now. So he tries to reload, but then he drops his magazine and instead of opening the door to grab it, he tries to crawl under the stall and gets stuck. He doesn't say stuck for long though, so I guess that was just to add pointless tension. He gets up and sees a rat walk by and assumes that's what he heard, but then a monster grabs him by the head and pulls him up through the hole in the ceiling, where he could see the blue screen where whatever effect they wanted to put there didn't work out, so they just left it. So Pinky sees Portman getting killed and laughs. Then Grim and Kid run in and start shooting, but then Sarge bursts in and fires the BFG, just barely missing the monster. He reacts like he didn't know what it would do, and yet he felt like it would be a good idea to discharge this giant gun in a confined space at a target only feet away. This is a video game movie, but they didn't think about splash damage. Sarge, Kid, and Grim brings Destroyer and Portman's bodies back to the infirmary, and Samantha explains Goat reanimated and killed himself, and tells Sarge the monster stuck in the nano wall is actually Dr. Carmack, as indicated by the missing ear. Samantha says it might be reversible, but then Sarge just shoots him with a pistol that sounds like a shotgun. So even though the bullets wouldn't kill it before, they do now. Sarge tells Kid and Duke to make sure the other dead scientists are really dead. Then he and Grim ask Samantha what she was downloading. She shows them a video of a prisoner being injected with a Martian chromosome and mutating. Grim says they need to destroy the research data, but Sarge stops him because their mission was to retrieve it. And then Sarge tells Samantha to finish downloading the data. Meanwhile, Kid and Duke tell Sarge over the radio that one of the dead scientists is missing. Sarge and Grim go to find him, and Grim gives Samantha the thing that like a tracker. And then Pinky gets on the radio and tells him something is trying to get to the Ark. The Marines rush back to the Ark and see that Pinky is gone, and that whatever got through the door made it through the Ark. Grim tries to contact Samantha, but she doesn't answer. So he rushes back to the infirmary, but it turns out she's fine. Samantha shows Grim how she found out the chromosome behaves differently in different people. Apparently, only people with genetic markers for psychotic and violent behavior will turn into monsters.
10% of the human genome is still unmapped.
Wrong. The Human Genome Project was completed in 2003, more than a year before this movie even started production. Anyway, Samantha theorizes that the 24th chromosome destroyed Martian civilization, because even though it gave some of them superpowers, the rest of them turned into monsters and killed everyone else. I guess because the people that had superpowers couldn't fight them. Grimm then realizes Sarge is planning to kill all the Olduvai survivors, because he doesn't know that not all of them are going to turn into monsters, even though Sarge never said that's what he was planning to do. So Sarge, Kid, and Duke take the Ark back to Earth and find out that Portman sent out a message requesting reinforcements, meaning the auto-lockdown will disengage in an hour, which will allow monsters and zombies to invade Earth. So Sarge, Duke, and Kid run around the Nevada base, shooting all of the corpses to make sure they don't reanimate, but then they run into zombies. Grimm and Samantha come through the Ark and find that they're too late to stop Sarge from killing everybody. Kid witnesses Sarge shoot a guy who's begging for help. Then Duke finds Pinky hiding under a bunch of dead bodies. Kid finds a room with some woman hiding with children because they have kids in this facility for some reason. But then we cut to Grimm and Samantha trying to explain to Sarge that they don't have to kill everyone. Duke shows up with Pinky, and even though he shows no signs of infection, Sarge wants to shoot Pinky. But before he can, Kid shows up and tells Sarge about the people hiding. Sarge tells Kid to go back and kill them, but when Kid refuses, Sarge shoots him. This scene kind of mirrors the part earlier when they all got in the elevator to get to the Ark, and Sarge told them that people will die if he hesitates, so this is kind of foreshadowed. So the movie gets a point for that, I guess. During the distraction, Pinky pulls a gun on Sarge, but then a monster comes up and grabs him and manages to drag him off because these well-trained Marines didn't start shooting until it was too late. Grimm and Sarge chase after them, but then they find themselves in a room full of zombies. They try to escape through a nano wall, but it won't close, presumably because they keep shooting it. Then a monster pulls Duke through a grate in the floor, and he disappears with a squirt of CGI blood. And then the zombies grab Sarge and pull him through the nano wall, and it closes as Grimm keeps shooting like an idiot, causing one of the bullets to ricochet and hit him. Grimm and Samantha barricade themselves in some kind of supply room, and Grimm is dying, so Samantha wants to inject him with the chromosome to hopefully give him his regeneration powers that will save him. Grimm refuses, believing himself to be evil and fearing it will turn him into a monster. Okay, so Grimm sees himself as a bad guy, and he knows that the chromosome will turn bad people into monsters, so he didn't want it. This is an important point because the movie is treating this like a conclusion to his character arc. Samantha injects him with the chromosome, but he doesn't turn into a monster, which is proof that he's not evil. So he discovers that he was wrong about himself and that he was a good guy all along. But the problem is, he never had any reason to see himself as a bad guy in the first place. As far as the audience is concerned, Grimm doesn't have any reason to see himself as a bad guy because the past he broods over so much is never explained. The only detail we know about his past is that his parents died. It might make sense if he had some kind of guilt complex over it, but it's never even like he blames himself or has any reason to as far as we know. So what has Grimm ever done that would make himself believe himself to be evil? And again, thematically speaking, what does any of this have to do with the plot? Grimm brooding over the death of his parents, seeing himself as a bad person, and discovering he isn't evil doesn't have any thematic parallel to a bunch of Marines running around shooting monsters on Mars. Let's look at another movie. In Aliens, we have a similar situation. Space Marines have to fight monsters, but the situation on LV-426 is relevant to Ripley's character arc. Ripley starts off traumatized by her experience in the previous movie, waking up from nightmares each night, and is also alone because she had been in hibernation for 50 years and everyone she knew was now dead, including the daughter she never got to see grow up. When a colony on LV-426 gets attacked by xenomorphs, she ends up reluctantly going back with a group of space marines as an advisor, and they are all overconfident and don't take the threat seriously at first. But when things go wrong, Ripley becomes the unlikely hero and gets a chance to face her fears. Having developed a motherly bond with one of the surviving children, she goes into the xenomorph nest to rescue her, and then faces off against her worst nightmare and defeats it. Ripley then ends the movie with a second chance to be a mother and finally able to sleep peacefully. Now contrast this with Doom. Grimm's parents died, Grimm is upset about it, There are monsters running around who have nothing to do with Grimm's parents or him being upset about their death. He sees himself as a bad guy for reasons that are never explained, but then he gets injected with a chromosome that proves he isn't a bad guy, and then he goes on killing monsters like he was already doing, just with slightly more confidence now. Where's the theme? Anyway, Samantha injects Grimm, then he faints. Sometime later, Grimm wakes up and then we get the famous first-person scene, which I guess is supposed to be sort of simulating the experience of playing the game. But remember, the most recent game at the time, and the one which this movie apparently took its inspiration from, was Doom 3, which was a much slower, less action-oriented take on the franchise. That game was less about action and more about building tension and jump scares. And also remember that now Grimm has the 24th chromosome, which gives him super strength and healing powers, which makes this basically nothing like Doom 3. Now, if this movie came out a few years later and was based on Doom 2016, or Doom Eternal, then it would be more tonally appropriate. But in either case, this whole sequence doesn't add much to the movie's narrative. It's kind of cool on a superficial level, but it's really just a pointless gimmick. I mean, if I wanted to watch somebody play Doom, I would just watch somebody play Doom. Or better yet, I would play it myself. And when you think about it, it's actually kind of stupid. Grimm was injected with the chromosome, right? And that, according to this movie, makes him stronger and gives him healing powers. We can also see that his reflexes are faster. So now he's able to fight all of these monsters thanks to the Martian chromosome. So if the Martians created this chromosome to heighten all of their abilities, how did they fail to fight off all of the monsters the same way Grimm does in this scene? How did the monsters cause the extinction of a race of supermen? So Grimm gets attacked by a monster resembling the Pinky Demon from Doom 3, but it has wheels for hind legs instead of robot legs like it does in the game. So I guess this is Pinky turned into a monster. It never explains why he turned into a completely different creature from everybody else, but Grimm just kills him without any remorse and moves on without a second thought, so if the movie doesn't care, I guess we're not supposed to either. Grimm finds Samantha laying in the hallway, having somehow managed to not get mauled by any of the monsters. But then Sarge shows up. Sarge tells Grimm he killed all the survivors Kid found. But then his knuckles get bigger, indicating he's starting to mutate. Or maybe his hands are just really strong from so many lonely nights. Sarge tries to shoot Grimm with his last BFG round. Then they end up in the Arc Chamber, which conveniently doubles as a video game-like boss arena with a wide open space in the middle for them to fight in. Sarge disappears, tries to ambush Grimm, and then Grimm gets the drop on him. Then Sarge hides and ambushes Grimm again. Then Sarge gives Grimm the perfect opportunity to shoot him, but instead of taking it, he just fires his last rounds into the ceiling and drops his gun so they can fist fight like they're in some kind of dumb action movie. They kung fu fight and do goofy wire stunts for a while, then Sarge wraps a metal bar around his fist and punches Grimm with it. At some point, the bar bends in such a way that Sarge is able to stab Grimm through the hand. But then Grimm hits a button that turns the arc on, because you don't need any keys, logins, or boot up time or anything, I guess. Then Grimm throws Sarge back to the Mars, and his hand is instantly healed because he has magic the chromosome. He grabs a nearby grenade and throws it through the arc, blowing up Sarge and the entire arc chamber, I guess. I like how this one little grenade produces an explosion bigger than the shot from the BFG, which makes it kind of pointless, doesn't it? Then we see Grimm carrying Samantha as they ride the elevator back up, and the movie just ends without any wind down or anything. Like it's a horror movie from the 1950s, which always ended as soon as the monster died. I guess they knew the target audience of 14-year-old boys with ADHD wouldn't want to sit around after the action was over. So that's Doom.
You killed me!
No, I didn't. The ground did.
I'm gonna possess you!
Oh yeah? Well, I'm gonna depress you.
I'm a demon! You can't depress me!
Half of all the people who have ever lived on Earth died as children.
Wait, is that true?
Less than 10% of rabbits in the wild survive to adulthood.
What?
The star-forming age of the universe will only last a few trillion years. Then it will be another Google years until heat death, when entropy reaches its maximum and time becomes meaningless. So the universe will spend more than 99.9% of its existence in total darkness before it fades away with no fanfare, rendering everything that's ever happened completely pointless. Alright.
I should have been dead, but I'm here to say it was not easy the way that I came, but Jesus saved me. Hallelujah, praise his name. I get excited